Hello there, and welcome to part 2 of Andre's artist profile on David Bowie. Now, we start out with what I would call a genuine grail of David Bowie's release, called Scary Monsters, and Super Creeps, it's subtitled. Now, this album was recorded with the help of Robert Fripp from King Crimson. Now, this album is a grail for more than one reason. It's a great David Bowie album, but it also developed a bit of a critical cliche with David Bowie. For most of the 90s and into the 2000s, each successive David Bowie album would be referred to by a lot of critics, quote-unquote, as the best David Bowie album since Scary Monsters. You know, I mean, you can read about that if you want online, I'm sure, but it's a great album and a really good yardstick for modern Bowie. And some people actually think to this day it's still his last great album. But I'm not going to underrate this one. This is very much Young Americans for the early 80s, recorded with, again, a master dance funk guy in Nile Rodgers. Let's Dance is an amazing dance funk new wave album that gave Bowie some great hits, and of course Let's Dance, a terrific song, and the more new wave oriented China Girl in 1983. Some people thought David Bowie was going a little bit too commercial, even for him on this album, but, you know, anti-80s revisionism I'm not interested in. So, moving on, to me, this is probably David Bowie's most underrated album, Tonight, from 1984. This album is actually quite a bit less pop-oriented than Let's Dance. Loving the Alien, Blue Jean, Dancing with the Big Boys. This album actually has some reggae and world music touches on it, and I think if people had given it a chance, they might have found something good on it, and they didn't. I think he got caught up again in anti-80s revisionism. There's an album he recorded in 1987 called Never Let Me Down. I'm not sure how crazy I am about that album material-wise, so I don't have that one. But his next album was with the band Tin Machine, recorded in 1989. While not strictly a David Bowie album, it's still very much led by him. They are actually a noise rock-oriented group that kind of had a lot of influence, I suppose, on what the grunge thing tried to do, but probably weren't very successful at. So anyway, that's Tin Machine. This next album was actually a gift to his then-wife, Iman, and it's called Black Tie, White Noise. This came out in 1993. Interestingly enough, during the height of the alternative era, this album was very much a disco funk album along the lines, in fact, of a 90s version of Young Americans and Let's Dance. Unfortunately, the critics at the time didn't like it. If you remember, a lot of radio stations would only play the sub-pop music coming out of Seattle or the hard gangster-type hip-hop. Stuff like this could not get played. I mean, in England it's a different story, but in America there was some hardship. An attempt to imitate some of the cover art for the alternative era that always looked kind of cheap and ridiculous to me, David Bowie released this album Outside in 1995, I believe. It's in a digipack. This album actually, though, is not that bad. This was when he was collaborating with Trent Reznor, alias 9 Inch Nails. Actually, not a bad album. I really like this. I haven't reviewed it on Amazon or anything yet, but it's a really good album. It's not bad. Earthling came out in 1997, and this was an album where he experimented with drum and bass, which was a very heavily, almost overused sound at the time. He also did a song for the David Lynch film Lost Highway called I'm Deranged from this period. That's not actually on this album. But it's very rocky, very heavy, very alternative rock friendly, but anyway. Moving on, this album, Hours, came out in 1999, and Bowie was really enthused about internet MP3 sales. As a matter of fact, this album was made available for download long before it came out, and there's a track that you will not find on this edition that's only available online. Great pop album from Bowie, as is this one, Heathen, from 2002. I remember when this album came out, there were a lot of posters to it at the local record store I go to called Bull Moose. Another great hooky pop album. I don't think it had a lot of hits, but Bowie actually went to being more of an album artist at this particular point with Heathen. The next album, which came out, I think, a year later, was called Reality. This was Bowie's last new album for a whole decade. And it's a very good album. A little darker than Heathen, but still not too bad. Now here's his latest album. I couldn't believe that he just used the Heroes cover and covered it with that little blurb. I think it's part of Bowie's very strange sense of humor. But it's a great overall album. Very much in the style of a classic Bowie album from the late 70s. Really good production. Bowie sounds like he's still in full form. And I was so surprised it came out. I pretty much thought that David Bowie was retired. So that's what I have for David Bowie from the 80s and in general. So enjoy the previous video and enjoy this one, and happy birthday, David Bowie. I'm really glad to have you back in 2013. And as always, I'll see you next time.